The bride was sent to the wrong ranch. But before she could even explain, a small barefoot girl clutched her skirt, tilted her tear-filled eyes upward, and whispered, "God finally sent you to us." Montana Territory, winter of 1869. The land was buried in endless white, snow swirling like knives across the horizon. The sky pressed low, gray and heavy, as though the whole world held its breath. Annabelle Sinclair trudged forward, boots sinking deep into the frozen earth. Her wool shawl clung damp against her throat, her gloved hands stiff with cold. She had traveled for days, alone, hungry, frightened, clutching a letter that promised her a new life, a marriage, a place to belong. At last, she saw it, a dark silhouette rising against the storm. A lonely ranch house, its windows dim with firelight. Hope and dread tangled inside her chest as she forced her shaking legs toward the door. Her knuckles hovered, ready to knock. But the door creaked open first. A tall man filled the frame. His eyes, slate gray, studied her like she were a ghost wandering in from the storm. His jaw tightened, his coat hung loose, and at his hip rested a revolver, worn but ready. On his left hand gleamed a gold wedding band, dulled by years of wear. Annabelle steadied her breath. I am Annabelle Sinclair, sent by the Missouri Matrimonial Agency. I was told to come here to marry a Mr. Carter. The man's gaze hardened. His voice was low, rough. My name is Colt Rafferty, and I did not order a bride. For a heartbeat, silence cut sharper than the wind. Annabelle's stomach sank, but she forced her voice calm. The letter said this was Red Bluff Ranch. Is it not? Colt's jaw worked. It is, but there's no Carter here. You've come to the wrong ranch, Miss Sinclair. He started to close the door. Annabelle's chest seized with panic. She stepped forward, snow tumbling off her shawl. Please, don't send me away. The last stage left for Fort Banner hours ago. The storm will only get worse. I have nowhere else to go. Colt hesitated. His hand lingered on the door. For a long moment, only the howling wind spoke. Then, at last, he stepped aside. You can come in, he said flatly, but only for the night. Relief crashed through her, too heavy to speak. She stumbled across the threshold, her body aching, boots leaving wet marks on the wooden floor. The air inside smelled of wood smoke and quiet years. Sparse furniture, a stone fireplace, walls lined with shadows. Annabelle placed her small travel trunk near the door. Her eyes caught on a bonnet, no larger than a child's, hanging beside a rifle. A wooden horse sat abandoned near the hearth. And on the mantel, dust lay over the portrait of a woman with pinned hair and unsmiling eyes. Colt's voice was rough when he spoke again. She passed 3 years ago. My wife. Annabelle's throat tightened. She bowed her head gently. I did not come to replace anyone. I only have nowhere else to be. He said nothing, only gestured down the hall. There's a spare room. Stay till morning. I'll take you back to Fort Banner myself. Too tired to argue, she nodded. But before she could move, soft footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. From the shadows, a small figure appeared, a girl no older than 5, barefoot in a faded nightdress. Her hair fell in tangled waves, her face pale, her wide eyes shimmering with something too heavy for a child. Colt froze. His hand twitched, not for his gun, but as if to steady himself. The girl walked straight to Annabelle. Not a word passed, until her tiny fingers clutched the edge of Annabelle's skirt. Her lips parted, and in a voice Colt hadn't heard in years, she whispered, breathy and broken, God finally sent you to us. God finally sent you to us. The whisper hung in the air, fragile as glass. Colt Rafferty's breath caught. His little girl had not spoken a single word since that terrible night 3 years ago. Now, she pressed her small body into the skirt of a stranger. Annabelle's knees weakened. She slowly bent down, meeting the child's wide eyes. Hello, sweetheart, she whispered. My name is Annabelle. The girl's lips trembled. Are you going to leave too? Annabelle's heart cracked open. She touched the child's cheek gently. No, not tonight. Colt stood rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. His voice, rough but softened, broke the silence. Her name is Emmy. She hasn't spoken since. His jaw locked, the rest unspoken. Annabelle glanced at him, then back to Emmy. She smoothed the girl's tangled hair with a trembling hand. Well, Emmy, she said softly, I think you're very brave. The little girl's grip tightened, as if she feared Annabelle would vanish into the storm. That night, the wind screamed against the windows. Snow piled higher against the ranch house walls, sealing them in silence. Annabelle lay awake in the spare room, staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the house, every howl of the storm outside, pressed against her chest. She had nowhere else to go. And yet, for the first time in years, she felt strangely needed. In the parlor, Colt sat before the fire, his revolver on the table, untouched whiskey at his elbow. His gray eyes burned with memories. He could still hear his daughter's voice, words he thought he'd never hear again. And she had spoken them to this stranger, this woman who had arrived at his door by mistake. The next morning, pale light spilled across the frozen land. Annabelle woke to the sound of wood being chopped outside. She wrapped her shawl tight and stepped quietly into the kitchen. There, she found Emmy. The child sat at the table, clutching a ragged doll with missing buttons. She watched Annabelle with curious, solemn eyes. Annabelle smiled gently. "Would you like some tea?" Emmy didn't answer, but her eyes followed Annabelle's every movement as she lit the stove and boiled water. When Annabelle placed a warm cup on the table, Emmy only held it in her tiny hands, as if savoring its heat. Colt entered, dusting snow from his coat. His eyes flicked to Annabelle, then to Emmy. "The roads are blocked. You'll have to stay a few more days." Annabelle nodded quietly. She had expected anger, perhaps even resentment. But his tone wasn't cruel, just resigned. Later that day, while Colt repaired the barn door against the storm's fury, Annabelle explored the house. She noticed the dust that clung to shelves, the piano in the parlor with keys yellowed from silence, the photograph of Colt's late wife watching over every room. And everywhere she went, Emmy followed, silent, barefoot, holding her doll, peeking from doorways. At last, Annabelle sat by the window with a needle and thread, mending her worn gloves. Emmy crept forward and placed something on the table. A folded paper. Annabelle opened it. Inside was a child's drawing. 3 stick figures. One tall man, one woman with yellow hair, and a little girl holding both their hands beneath a crooked sun. Above them, in shaky letters, was a single word, "Mama." Annabelle's breath hitched. Tears stung her eyes. She pressed the paper to her chest, her heart trembling. From the doorway, Colt watched silently. His hands tightened on the frame, emotions he had buried clawing their way back to the surface. For the first time in years, the house did not feel entirely dead. Something had entered with the storm, something fragile, unexpected, but alive. Annabelle's fingers trembled as she held the child's drawing against her chest. "Mama." The word ached and healed her all at once. In the doorway, Colt Rafferty leaned against the frame, silent, watching. His gray eyes were unreadable, but the set of his jaw told a story Annabelle did not yet know. She forced a faint smile, blinking back the sting in her eyes. "It's beautiful, Emmy," she whispered. The girl's face softened into the smallest of smiles, uncertain but real. Colt shifted, his voice gravel low. "She draws a lot, but not like this." Annabelle glanced up at him. The air between them was thick, heavy with things unspoken. Colt turned away, leaving her with the child's fragile gift pressed to her heart. That night, the fire burned low, shadows stretching long across the walls. Annabelle sat in the parlor, the shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Emmy had already drifted to sleep upstairs, clutching her ragged doll. Colt stood near the window, arms crossed, staring into the snow. He hadn't spoken much all day, but Annabelle could feel words clawing at him, fighting to stay buried. At last, he broke the silence. "I found a letter today." Annabelle stiffened. Her eyes flicked to her trunk in the corner. "You read it?" "I did." His voice was flat, but softer than before. A sharp ache knotted her stomach. "Shame. Fear." She looked down at her hands. "Then you know," she whispered. Colt turned slowly. "That you were a nurse during the war. That you were wounded. That you'll never—" He stopped, his eyes lowering. "Never have children of your own." The silence between them was heavy, crushing. Annabelle forced her chin up. Her voice shook. "I do not want your pity." His reply was steady, startling. "You don't have it. Only my respect." Annabelle's throat tightened. She hadn't expected that. For the first time, she felt seen. Not broken, not unwanted, but whole. The storm outside raged louder, snow thrashing against the windows. Yet inside, something fragile began to thaw. The days stretched on. The snow refused to melt, locking the ranch in silence. Annabelle cooked small meals, mended torn cloth, and read aloud from the worn Bible on the shelf. Emmy listened, curled close, her small fingers always clutching Annabelle's sleeve. And every night, Colt fixed something. A broken chair leg, a drafty window, a cracked kettle. He said little, but each repair was quiet proof that he noticed her presence. Yet the house still carried ghosts. Annabelle could feel them in every corner. In the dust over the late wife's portrait. In the piano keys untouched for years. In the way Colt's hand sometimes lingered on his wedding band. One morning, while changing Emmy's bedding, Annabelle discovered another drawing beneath the pillow. But this one was not bright with suns or stick figures holding hands. It was jagged, dark, a woman being dragged away by a looming shadow. A man lying still on the ground, 3 shaky words above his head, "Pa is asleep." Annabelle's chest tightened. She carried the paper to the parlor, where Colt was oiling a door hinge. Quietly, she placed the drawing before him. Colt froze, his hands stilled, his eyes locked on the frantic lines. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low and torn, he admitted, "I was drunk that night." His shoulders sagged beneath a weight invisible but crushing. "I woke to blood. On my shirt. On the floorboards. My wife was gone. No body. No note. Just gone." Annabelle's breath caught. She studied his hollow expression. "Do you believe you hurt her?" His jaw clenched. His voice cracked. "I don't know." The fire popped sharply, echoing in the silence. Annabelle's heart pounded as she stared at the drawing, at the child upstairs who remembered far more than anyone thought. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing within these walls. The words hung between them like a noose. "I don't know." Colt's voice cracked under the weight of guilt he had carried for years. Annabelle's fingers tightened on the drawing. Shadows stretched long across the parlor floor, and outside, the storm clawed at the walls as if trying to tear them down. Before she could speak, footsteps thundered on the porch. The door creaked open, and a stranger stepped inside. His coat was dust-stained, his hat pulled low, his boots heavy with miles of travel. Colt's eyes narrowed. "Danner." Annabelle stiffened. Emmy had crept down the stairs, clutching her doll, when her small body froze. Her eyes widened in horror. She bolted behind Annabelle, trembling. The man's smile was cold. "The little one remembers, doesn't she?" Annabelle's heart seized. She grabbed Emmy close. You killed her," she whispered. Danner's grin darkened. She wasn't supposed to be there. Neither was the child. But Colt was too drunk to know the difference. Couldn't risk the truth coming out then. "And I can't risk it now." His hand slipped beneath his coat. Steel glinted. A knife. Annabelle spun, lunging for the rifle above the mantel. Too late. Danner slammed it aside. The weapon clattered to the floor. He shoved Annabelle back, knife raised. A scream tore from her lips. Emmy shrieked, darting forward in terror. "No!" Annabelle threw herself between the blade and the child. Fire seared across her side. She collapsed, blood blooming across her bodice. "Annabelle!" Colt's roar cracked the air. A single rifle shot thundered. Danner stumbled, clutching his chest, before crashing to the floorboards. The knife slipped from his hand with a dull clang. Colt dropped the smoking rifle, rushing to Annabelle's side. Blood stained his hands as he tried to hold her together. "Stay with me," he begged, voice raw. Emmy sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to Annabelle's arm. Her voice, fragile, broken, pierced the night. "Mama, don't go. Please, Mama." Colt froze. The word he thought he'd never hear again. Mama. Emmy's first word in years, cried not for the woman she lost, but for the woman bleeding before her. Annabelle touched the child's face weakly. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered through pain. Neighbors, drawn by the gunshot, arrived within minutes. Danner's body was hauled away, his crimes finally exposed. But none of it mattered to Colt. Not the law, not justice. Only Annabelle's shallow breaths as fever raged through her broken body. For days, Colt sat at her bedside, wiping her brow, whispering her name, begging her to fight. Emmy never left either, curling against Annabelle, her small hand always clutching hers. At last, the fever broke. Annabelle opened her eyes. Weak, but alive. Colt bent low, tears streaming. "You saved us," he whispered. Weeks passed. The snow melted, giving way to fragile sunlight. The ranch felt different now, lighter, alive. Emmy laughed in the yard, chasing her doll in the brittle grass. Annabelle stitched by the window. Colt repaired the fence, glancing often toward the house. One morning, he returned from the barn carrying something small, a velvet pouch. He stood before Annabelle, his rough hands trembling. "I wore this too long," he said, sliding his old wedding band into her palm. "I loved her, but loving her doesn't mean I stop living. Emmy needs a mother. And his eyes shone with a vulnerability she had never seen. "I need you." Annabelle's breath caught. Tears welled. "Colt." He dropped to one knee in the frostbitten grass. "I choose you, Annabelle Sinclair. Will you marry me?" Emmy came running, cheeks pink, eyes bright. She pressed herself between them, clutching Annabelle's skirt. "Say yes, Mama. Please." Annabelle cradled the child close, her tears spilling freely. She looked at Colt, at the broken man who had found his strength again, and at the little girl who had whispered her back to life. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Colt slid the ring onto her finger. The three of them embraced, snow glittering like diamonds around them, as though even the land itself rejoiced. 1 week later, the church in Fort Banner filled with warmth. Townsfolk who had once pitied Colt now smiled with quiet blessing. Emmy scattered petals down the aisle in her blue dress, beaming with joy. When the preacher asked who gave the bride away, Emmy stood tall, her little voice clear. "I do." Laughter filled the chapel. Colt's gray eyes shone bright as he kissed his new wife beneath the winter sun. That night, as fire crackled low and Emmy slept soundly between them, Annabelle whispered into the silence, a truth she had once thought impossible. "I wasn't born to be a mother, but I was called to become one. And in that house where so much had been lost, something at last had been found.